Hello there, welcome to my channel. This is the second review I've done of an E-Ink Spectra ink device, which is basically a device designed to be hung on the wall and to be framed as art or to display pictures or what have you. The first one was the reflection frame, which was a 13-inch Spectra 6 device, and this Aluratek is of the same specifications and the same list price. So these two devices are competing with each other directly in the marketplace, and it'll be interesting to see that comparison. So this review is going to basically go over, all the hardware aspects of the Aluratek. We're going to go over how different images appear on the device. We're going to go over the app and how that functions. And then eventually I'll kind of compare that to the reflection frame and we'll see where we stand overall. These devices and others coming down the road are all using the exact same screen from the E-Ink Corporation. So what differentiates one company from the other isn't the screen itself, it's all the things around the screen. And that'll be the focus of this video, in addition to how the screens themselves perform. All right, let's go ahead and dig on in. Okay, so instead of filming the actual unboxing experience, I thought it would just be quicker and easier to take stills as I went through the process. So I'm going to show you stills of taking the device out of the box, as well as the different components. So this will be kind of a combination of unboxing and view of the hardware as we go through these various images. One of the things that was important to note is there are many boxes that come with this device. So you have the actual shipping box, which is not displayed, and then you take the contents out of that shipping box, and that's what you see here. So this is the next box, and then we'll just zoom in on that label to show you what the product is that is within that box. And then inside this box is this, which is the actual product itself, which is basically a black box with a sleeve around it. And we're seeing the front side of that sleeve here, and then you see the back side here, and then there is the side. So if you pull that sleeve off, then you get this almost purely black box. There is on the left and the right Aluratek and silver writing on the sides, which looks kind of nice. But then you take the lid off, and this is what you see. So they've got some nice padding. So one of the themes, I could gripe about how much boxing and packaging there is available, but there's no doubt that it does, give a sense of a bit of quality. And surely everything that came was really well done, was really well packaged. There was no damage to any items. So even though there was a lot of packaging and that was a little bit annoying, you have to say that the result of it was worth it. And Aluratek really has a lot of experience in working with electronic frames, and you can tell both in the packaging and, as we'll see, in the design of the frame itself. So here is, below the lid, and you can see on top there is the black mat in packaging, and just beyond that is the device itself. If you pull the device and the mat out, below that are a couple inserts as well as the documentation for the product. The manual that comes with it is a multi-page manual. I don't remember the exact number, maybe it's 12 to 16 pages, something like that. But with a lot of images, and there was a lot of effort that was put into the packaging. Here are the actual contents in those inserts, in the empty recesses that you see in the middle of the screen. You've got on the lower right is your acrylic stand, and we'll show examples of the device in the stand in just a little bit. Lower left, you've got a USB-C to USB-C cable. That's for charging of the device. And then finally, in the upper left, you've got the kind of mounting kit items. You need the little screwdriver in order to take off the 4 tabs that are in the outside of the frame. They hold the contents in. And then, of course, if you're going to do any type of hanging, either in portrait or landscape, where you're only going to be hanging on, say, one nail or one hook, then you'll need the wires to do that. The shorter wire is for portrait orientation, and the longer wire is for landscape orientation. And then they've got additional mounting supplies above those wires. Here's more of the documentation, and is a mounting guide. The mounting guide, however, is only useful if you're using the brackets, which you can see in the image there on the left, and you're going to go into portrait mode. There was not a guide for landscape mode. And then there is the manual that I talked about a little bit earlier. Here you can see side by side the black matte versus the white matte. The thing to understand here is that these are very much black and white. They're very stark in their coloration. So the white, for example, really kind of highlights, in my case, the fact that my walls were antique white. So what would normally look like a white wall suddenly looks cream in relation to this white matte. So it wasn't really a good look. So I ended up going with the black matte on my wall. However, the downer of the black matte is it's so dark, it matches the outside frame, so it's a little bit much, unless you have a really good lighting, and then you can see a little bit of a change in coloration between the frame and the matte itself. So you have to kind of play with it and see which one works best for your situation, but just know it is a really dark black and a very much a bright white. Here is the back of the device itself. If you look on the outer rim, you can see there's 4 little tabs, 2 on top and 2 on bottom. And you need to unscrew those with the little screwdriver they packaged in order to get into the contents. That is to either change either matte, or if you want to pull the device out, to put onto the acrylic stand. My one complaint about the structure of the device really comes down to those 4 tabs. They're easy to screw off, but to screw in properly takes a lot of effort. It gets slightly easier over time, but still it would have been nice to see maybe, I don't know, some sort of clamp or something a little easier to remove. But it's a small gripe. You can see there's 4 brackets, 2 on the left, 2 on top. Again, that's for landscape or portrait mounting if you have 2 nails or hooks to hang on. And then within that, you'll notice that there are 3 kind of circles that are protruding from the back. Those are little screws that you can pull out. They have 2 functions. The first is you can draw wire between them. Again, either to go into portrait or into landscape. But also, those are connect to the back of the device, which we'll see in an image shortly, and that's what mounts the device to this back plate. So if you want to take the device and put it on the acrylic stand, you'll have to unscrew those 3 screws in order to release it. So all sides are flat, except for one, and this is what is coming out slightly on that one side. It's you've got the power button, you have a reset button, and you've got your next button, which advances to the next image. You have those 2 circles are power indicators, and then you've got your USB-C port for charging. Here is a quick start guide. This is an addition to the manual. Again, they put a lot of effort in the packaging, and this is an example of that. So this is the device just with the white matte, and it hasn't been activated yet. When you turn it on for the first time, you see this image. Now this image will go away once you start loading your own images, but it's a nice image that shows off, I think, the range of colors, at least some of the colors that are available on the screen. It also is really nice because it's very hard to see any of the pixels. It just does a good job of highlighting the tech. It's not a picture I would use, and it does go away as soon as you start loading your own, so that's probably good anyway. But this is their kind of introductory picture that you'll see. This is what the device looks like if you remove the device as well as the back plate. So you have the filler there, and then you've got the matte just below that. And of course you can see your USB-C cable, which connects those buttons on the side to the device itself. Here's what the device looks like when it's completely taken out of the frame. And you notice you still have access to 3 buttons, but instead of 3 kind of larger buttons, there are these 3 tiny buttons. And of course, there's your USB-C port as well. The buttons have the same functionality, power, reset, and advance to the next image. Here's just an example of the device, which is in white, and you can see the holes and the screws that help mount them to the back plate, which is just behind. So here's an example of the device on the acrylic stand. And so this is in portrait mode, obviously. And here's an image from the side, so you can see the stand in action. And then there is the other side with the buttons exposed. And then, of course, you can go into landscape mode here as well. Here's just an image of just the frame by itself, of course with the USB-C cable attached. Then if you add a matte, in this case this is the white matte, it would look like that. Then you add in your filling, and then finally you would put your device mounted on the back plate on top of that, and that completes the device. So that is just a quick overview of the unboxing and the hardware. You know, my overall assessment is the hardware is really well done. It's really well packaged. With the exception of those 4 little tabs that I talked about earlier, I think the hardware is excellent. And I don't have any particular gripes. It's easy to disassemble and assemble, again, except for having to tighten those 4 tabs. But other than that, really well done. And you can just see how much Aluratek has experience in packaging electronic frames. It really comes through with this particular product. Okay, so we're going to go through a series of images, and we're going to start off with this color calibration template, which is designed for ink and laser jet printers. Just a little bit of some context here. I'm putting this frame about a yard away from a window, so we're getting a lot of bright indirect sunlight, and we also have an indoor light which is coming in this way. But most of the illumination you see is from a window, and that is where the images can kind of pop the most. So with each image, I'm going to show the LCD equivalent of that image as well as a printed version of that image, and we'll focus on the comparison between what we see on the screen here on the art device versus the printed version. I'm just putting the LCD version in there for context. We know it's going to be a lot brighter and vibrant, and in fact that's of course the case here. You can see that the colors are much brighter, they pop more, etc. That's what we would expect from an LCD version of any of these images, but it's helpful to kind of put that into context with the E-Ink frame. Now, putting this aside, let's go ahead and take a look at the printed version, and here it is. And a few things to note. First off, the gradation of the colors is actually generally pretty good. It is a little bit minimal between the first and second bars, but then you can see the gradation go down accordingly. So not too bad. You do see that yellow completely washes out at the lowest level, but all the other colors are present. So not perfect, but not generally too bad. The other thing you'll notice right away is, of course, how white the paper is versus, the background of the E-Ink screen. It's much darker in general, and you can see that with some of the colors, but certainly highlighted with the white as well. Now, if we focus on the colors, of course, generally they're a little bit darker than what we see in the print version, but some colors are much more darker. So, for example, greens here are a bit bright, and they're much darker over here, whereas the yellows are a little bit darker, but it's not as pronounced as, say, with the greens. Cyan's a touch darker, but blue is a lot darker on the E-Ink screen, as is the case with magenta. You can see there's the magenta here, and here it's almost more of a purplish color. The red, not so bad, and the black actually looks pretty good. So generally speaking, colors are mostly accurate, but there are some areas where they're darker, and some colors are affected more than others. Our next image is a photograph which is taken from a camera phone, and here you can see the LCD version on the screen. We see 3 stuffed animals, and they're on a red velvet couch. If we go ahead and transition over to the paper version, of course the paper is landscape, so I cropped the image in order for it to fit on the E-Ink screen. Okay, a few things that stand out to me is the color of the red velvet couch is actually not bad. However, if you look closely, it does look a little bit splotchy here in the lower corners, and you certainly don't see that on the actual printed image, which has a little bit more detail and more consistent coloring. But as you go up toward the light source with the couch, that splotchiness goes away, and it looks pretty good. The other thing that I've noticed in this particular image is it's really hard to see the pixels. You have to come very close in order to see any type of pixelation. On the pro side, some of the details, particularly in the giraffe as an example, are really well done. If I focus over here, kind of on the right cheek area, you just see a lot of detail in the fabric patterns, in the individual threads. So it's kind of a nice picture that translates generally well if you ignore some of the splotchiness toward the bottom. And for the most part, if you are not too close to the frame, you're really not discerning that level of detail. Like a lot of other flaws that you find on these e-ink screens, you really have to be within a yard to discern them, and that's certainly the case here. Okay, our next image, and here we see the LCD version, is a Monet painting. This is an oil painting. This is in Giverny, France. And let's go ahead and switch then to the paper printout version of that image. And there we are. And of course, the very first thing you notice is how much brighter the printed version is versus the e-ink frame version. Having said that, there are areas that actually stand out more in the e-ink version. For example, the sunrise here as reflected on the water, I think is a little more striking, a little more powerful than it is here. You can argue that this isn't as accurate as the original, but I actually think it looks nicer on the e-ink frame. Also, cropping it really does kind of, to me, make the image look a little bit better because it allows you to center this bridge more. But that's just my personal opinion. Obviously, the overall theme is that the e-ink screen is darker. But you can tell the details in the corner of the image look really good on the e-ink version. And this is another example of why art sometimes fares a little bit better than other media on e-ink screens, because the brush strokes are such that you really don't notice any pixelation on this at all, even if you're right on top of the image. So, that's one advantage of displaying art on e-ink screens, is it kind of hides that pixelation effect that sometimes pops a little bit more with other media. Okay, here's another classic painting. This is the Tower of Babel by Brugel. And of course, here's the LCD version. And if we skip over to the printed version, again, this is more of a landscape picture that I've cropped into portrait mode. The app does allow you to go into landscape mode, and so I could have added this image with less cropping, but I decided to do all my images here in portrait mode just for simplicity. A few things to note, of course, like with the ongoing theme, the e-ink screen is a little bit darker than we see on the printed version. The other thing, though, that I notice with this is you'll notice that there's kind of this yellowish kind of earth tone in the printed version. And over here, it's just a little bit more orange, as well as being darker. So there is a little bit of a color variation there. You'll also notice that it gets really black down here, almost like it's smoke on the e-ink version. But the printed version actually helps show the true nature, which is that dark area are actually trees. So this is a great example of where the darkness of the e-ink can kind of get rid of some detail such that you're not necessarily able to discern what was in the image. But the overall image, I think, looks quite nice. Okay, next up is an image, and you can see the LCD version there. This is an image that I generated in AI. I believe it was in Gemini. And basically the idea is cats sieging a castle. So it comes up with kind of a cute theme there. And here's what it looks like when it's printed out. So there actually are a number of things to note. We see the classic example of the e-ink screen being darker than the print version. That continues. But it really gets dark. If you notice the backs of the cat's heads, you can see detail in this printed version, but it's completely washed out here in the e-ink image. And in fact, you really get kind of a washed out sense of the entire bottom of the screen, where you see a little bit of detail and subtlety here. So that gets lost with the e-ink. You also notice some muteness in the color. So where here you have kind of a nice bright green, that gets muted here on the ground in the image. You'll also notice that the color of the castle is different, where here it's kind of a gray stone. You see here, there's a little more brown in that coloring in this version of the castle. Having said that, though, this is another image where it's really hard to discern any of the pixels. If you come in close, you can see pixels eventually, but you have to really look for them. They're not apparent in this particular image. Okay, here is a black and white photo. This is, of course, of the Eiffel Tower, and there's the LCD image there. You can see, of course, it looks a bit brighter, and the whites and blacks have a little more contrast. And then if we switch over to the printed version, then there we have it. The printed version still is also brighter. And a few things to note about this image. Not only is it brighter, but because of that, you can make out more detail. So if you see the tree, you can see it's kind of a little bit lighter around here, and that's completely washed out in the image next to it. You do see a little bit of loss of detail on the E-Ink screen if you compare, but generally you do still see a lot of detail. This type of photograph does lend itself a little bit to being able to see some of the pixelation. Again, you do have to be quite close and you have to study the image in order to see it, but it's a little more apparent in this type of photo than it is in some of the other images that we've seen. But still, you really have to be on top of it in order to see that. I think by itself, if you don't have these comparators, and this is true of other images as well, it looks quite good. And that's really a theme that runs through all of the images that I've reviewed. So the next image is a classic comic book cover, and there is the LCD version. Of course, the colors pop more in the LCD version as usual, but of course more so in an image like this. If we switch over to the LaserJet printed version, still you see a lot more of the color popping there as well. And you can see things like the green is a bright green here. It's much darker over here. Same can be said, the red, it's just a little bit darker there. One of the kind of flaws that you notice when you're more on top of the image is a general splotchiness in the red area here on top. That of course isn't on the original. If you're within about a yard, you can notice that. Otherwise, you generally don't notice that there. But this is, again, another example of an image. We can pick apart the details of it that make it maybe not quite like the original and what have you, but by itself, with just a little bit of distance, looks really good hanging on a wall. Okay, for our next image, I'm going to go ahead and press the button so the image changes. Please note there's going to be a lot of flashing, so that those people that might be sensitive to that might want to look away. And this will take about 15 to 20 seconds to make the change. And here we go. It's starting to print the new image. So the image that's going to be printed is going to be this image down below. So you can see a lot of dark shades of green and a lot of detail in the color. So we're going to wait and see what our final, there is our final image, and you can see why this type of an image may not translate particularly well. I don't have the printed version, so I'll just compare here to the LCD, but you can see particularly over here, there's a lot of subtlety in the shades of green, which just gets lost in the darkness of the E-Ink screen. So this is not necessarily a great image. However, I will give plenty of props for capturing the detail of the reflection of the bridge in the water. Really looks excellent in this image, as much so as it does in the actual LCD image. And in fact, in some ways, it kind of stands out a little bit more for me as a positive. So there are advantages of the LCD screen versus even the original. So here's an example of what the black mat looks like. The white mat is so white that if you put it on a wall that is, antique white, for example, it really makes the wall look like cream. It's not a good color combination. The black mat, on the other hand, can suffer from the fact that sometimes the mat and the frame itself in weaker lighting will blend together, and it's almost a bit too much black. So depending on where you hang the device, just know that the mats are either starkly white or starkly black, and that does impact, how the device looks depending on where you hang it. Okay, so having looked at images from black and white to color photographs, to classical art pieces, to AI-generated art, to comic book covers and phone photographs, what is the overall kind of thoughts that kind of string these things together? And I think broadly speaking, there are three areas where the e-ink screen doesn't necessarily stack up to the images that it's presenting. And the first is, of course, around the general darkness of the screen. Everything is a little more muted as a result, a little bit darker. Sometimes details wash out as a result of that. And that's one of the reasons why it is good to kind of mount these types of screens in rooms that don't necessarily need direct sunlight, although direct sunlight is fine. They'll look good in direct sunlight. But indirect sunlight rooms are things that really kind of bring the strengths of the e-ink screen more to the forefront and minimizing some of these things like the darkness. The other thing that we saw through most of these images is that if you're within 3 feet of them, and the camera lens, by the way, was about 2 feet away from the image. So if you're standing within 3 feet of the frame, then you're going to start to notice, depending on the image, some pixelation. It's not obvious pixelation. Sometimes you have to kind of really focus to find it. Sometimes it's a little more obvious. But that pixelation is there upon close review. And you see some splotchiness, which is there as well in certain instances. However, and we saw that mostly with reds, oddly enough, but if you move any distance away from the image, certainly more than 3 feet, all that stuff washes away and you don't notice either the pixels nor the splotchiness. So it's only upon close inspection that those are issues. And the final kind of broad, I suppose, criticism is the color accuracy isn't always there. Some colors are better than others, but we saw, different shades of colors from the original to what was eventually displayed on the e-ink screen. And that was kind of a consistent theme around most of these images. Having said all of that, despite all of those weaknesses, if you're a reasonable distance away, and most of the time when you're hanging art, you're not right on top of it, the images do look really good, and the colors are accurate enough that they don't draw attention to themselves unless you have that other image either in the forefront of your mind or literally close at hand. So generally speaking, despite these flaws, the Spectra screens did, in my opinion, a really good job across all of these image types, and they're more than acceptable. Some, of course, fare a little bit better than others. The green kind of arch and pond was an example of an image that probably is just a little too washed out overall to be a good item to display on this frame, but all the other images looks fine to me. Okay, let me say something a little briefly around the battery life. Now, before we get into some of the numbers here, let's understand how the device operates. So basically, when it's generating an image or printing an image, and when it's connected to Wi-Fi, that's where the battery drain happens. And in order to minimize that, the device essentially is spending a vast majority of its time in a sleep mode, where it's really draining nothing at all. So what I did to try to simulate battery life is over a 24-hour period, I had the image change every 30 minutes. That's as frequently as the software will allow. And then I measured what that drain was. And it basically equated to about a 9% battery drain. If you extrapolate that then and say, well, how many times could the frame last if you change the image, say, once a day, then it would last for just under 1.5 years. Now, the actual battery life will probably vary. You do get a little bit of drain even when you're in sleep mode, so it might not last quite that long. And of course, if you end up refreshing your screen less often, say once a week, it will last longer. So it all really depends on how you end up using the device. But regardless, the battery life is going to last a long time. And when it's time to charge, you just connect the USB-C cable in, charge it, and you're good to go. I think for most people, just if with some reasonable rate of changing the screen, may say once or even twice a day, you might be able to get up to a year of charge out of it, and maybe even a little bit longer. Okay, we're going to take a quick look at the app and some of its functionality. And this is it right here. It might be a little bit hard to distinguish because the icon is so small, but basically it has a pink background and it has a white droplet and then the letter E on that, kind of presuming E-Ink, I suppose. If you click on that, you go into the app. It'll list however many frames are connected to the device. In my case, I just have the one. If the device was currently online, the frame itself, then I would see the power indicator there, but you can see with the Wi-Fi image it's not currently online, so you don't see the power. We're going to go ahead and click on this, and the gallery of images that are currently loaded or to be loaded on the device are displayed, and you can go through those accordingly. One thing to keep in mind is that, at least as far as I can tell, the order of which images are displayed, if you're on a schedule, is to kind of basically go backwards, if you will. So, this image was loaded first, this image was loaded next, then this image, oops, sorry. So when it starts displaying, let's say it starts with this image here, this black and white Eiffel Tower, the next image will be here, the Avengers comic, and then finally this kind of green pond and bridge would be next, and then we go all the way to the bottom for your next image. I'm not aware of any way to change that order other than to get rid of the photos and load them in the order you want. There's no shuffle option that I'm aware of either. You can long press on an image and you can go ahead and delete the photo or cancel, and you can just tap on it and it basically gives you those same options. There's delete, and this would actually allow you to show this image right away. So let's go ahead and get out of that. Let's go ahead and add a photo. So I'm going to quickly go into my gallery and pull up an image. Okay, so here's an image. This is the frame on the wall. And you can see I can change the zoom perspective. So I can either zoom in or I can zoom out. However, you'll notice that there's some limitations in terms of zooming out. It won't allow bars on either the sides or the top. So you have to basically work with the image that you have. So really, for the most part, you'll be zooming in. So for example, we can zoom in so that the picture is filling the entire screen. And then we can click the check mark, and then that would save that picture onto the device. So that's basically what you can do in terms of bringing pictures in and editing them a bit. So not a lot, but you've got a little bit of zoom, and then you can change, what exactly you want to display. Now, if we click on this three buttons over here, and we go into details and settings, so you get some specific information about the device, but down below is where you've got some of the more important settings. So first off, if you want it to automatically rotate between photos, this is the setting that you'd pick, and it's on. Then you can also set the orientation, whether you want vertical or horizontal, or I always call it portrait and landscape. And then you can do different scheduling types. And so what this is indicating is two things in this case. The first thing it's indicating is how often does it connect? How often does it turn on Wi-Fi and then connect over the internet? And then if you have your schedule set, this also sets the same interval that turns on Wi-Fi will also change the images accordingly. So both are based on one setting, and you've got the option to schedule. And let's go ahead and you can click on the schedule here, and those are kind of your options. You can pick your days and your times, or you can do it in intervals, which are here. And those are the selection of intervals available. So it goes from 30 minutes at the lowest to 1 week at the highest. And that's the basic functionality of the application. Now, one thing I will point out is that in kind of subsequent use, sometimes the schedule isn't always operating. There's something that causes it to not move through the sequence of photos. And that's usually because there was a manual intervention that disrupted that process, and sometimes it has a hard time reconnecting with that. So if you end up with that issue, you just press the power button once or twice, and that will hopefully put it back onto the schedule. So it is a little bit of a quirk that I've noticed, but once you're on your schedule and images are changing, it seems to work pretty well at that point. I've mentioned a few of the cons of the device throughout the video, but I thought I would do kind of a quick consolidated list as I've been taking notes of some issues that I've encountered with the frame. I want to emphasize that most of these are really small. Some of them were just kind of transitory. They happened maybe initially, didn't happen later. And I don't think most of these add up to very much, but I wanted to share them with you in the sake of full disclosure. And these will be in no particular order. There were some times where I was pressing buttons on the side that an image would change only to quickly change again. I'm not quite sure what triggered that, but that was kind of an odd thing. But when it operates in normal mode, under a normal schedule, I don't experience that. So it's only in kind of playing with the device and with the buttons that happened on occasion. The back brackets are really hard to screw in, and that makes it a little bit of a pain in order to change mats or in order to pull out the device to put onto the acrylic stand. So it's not terrible. You can certainly work with it, and they give you that little screwdriver, but I just thought those could have been done a little bit better. I did have some issues early on in connecting my device to the Wi-Fi network. It's possible that was more user error than it was the device itself, or it could have been the device really needed a dedicated 2.4 gigahertz band. I was never quite sure. I was able to work through that issue and it was fine, so take that with a grain of salt. It could have been just me. As I mentioned earlier, the mats are either a stark white or stark black. And so the white I thought didn't work well on my antique white walls, and the black was almost too much black. So I kind of would have wished maybe more subtle colors that wouldn't have clashed so much against the wall or showed a little more variation from the outer frame, because the black can just blend in with that. So that was a bit much. Again, very small gripe. The edge of the frames where the pieces would come together have you can see the lines that weren't painted on each of the corners. It's something you only notice when you're actually handling the device. When you mounted it on the wall, you don't notice that at all. There is some reflectivity in the screen, and that's true of the Spectra 6 screen. So it's not just this particular device, but you do have to have a little bit of care about where you hang it on the wall, because you could get a little bit of glare depending on where the lighting's coming in. It's not as bad as having, say, a print with a glass screen on top of it. It's much better than that, but there is some reflections there. Lots of packaging, and you can see this as either a pro or a con, but there was like 3 boxes and there was just tons of packaging in there. I would have liked just a little bit less, but on the flip side, of course, it shows their dedication to quality, and all the materials came out great and purely undamaged. So you can look at that one way or the other. And then the final thing I noted is that when you're working with the app, you only see the battery indicator if the device is active. So remember, in order to save battery, the device is normally not active, and so you don't know what the battery is. So you have to press the power button on the frame, and then you can see the battery status on the app. It would have been nice if they had just stored whatever the last battery status was when the frame connected to Wi-Fi, but that's not the way the app works. So again, a lot of little details of things that maybe could have been a little bit better, but nothing earth-shaking. No reason I see not to purchase a device. Just some challenges you have, whether it's taking apart all that packaging or whether it's switching mats or whatever, that could have been done a little bit better, but honestly, I don't think are a problem in the end. Despite my minor gripes, it's really obvious that Aluratek has a lot of experience in electronic frames. The device is generally well built, very solidly designed. There's really good mounting options available with the frame or with the acrylic stand. And the images, I think, overall look really good and do a really good job. So I feel quite positive to the Aluratek, and I would recommend it. Now, the interesting question then is, which device would you get between the Aluratek and the reflection frame? Because again, both of them sell at $350. So where is the preference between the two? And I think there's a lot of little things that you could point to that I'm not sure matter all that much. So if I were to kind of get rid of that and just focus at the highest level, I think the first question you would ask yourself is, do you want a device that connects via Wi-Fi or via NFC? NFC, again, is the technology where you can use your phone or any other NFC-enabled device, and you can send images by tapping onto the device. The reflection frame uses NFC, while the Aluratek uses Wi-Fi. So why does that matter? Well, where I have my reflection frame currently mounted is at work, and I don't have the ability to connect to the Wi-Fi network there, not for my personal items. Could I, put my frame onto a mobile network? Yes, but it's just a lot easier to use NFC, and so I prefer that there. Whereas in the home setting, I have really good Wi-Fi access. It's great coverage. That's not a concern at all. And for the home setting, the Wi-Fi kind of makes more sense. So it really just depends on a situation like that or on the individual. When I think of giving these type of things out as gifts, I think the NFC is a little easier for folks that maybe aren't quite as technically inclined. Whereas the Wi-Fi, you have to put a little bit of effort to set your device up on the Wi-Fi network, etc. So, that is a consideration as well. But it's not that one's better than the other necessarily. It depends on what you're hoping to get. Now, let's say that you were neutral between the two. The next thing I would consider, and this is, I think, more of a positive for the Aluratek, is the fact that you can have scheduling of the images. So with the reflection frame, you only change images by tapping and loading on a new image via NFC. There's no storage on the frame itself. But with the Aluratek, they can store up to 10 images. You can set up schedules for it to change automatically. And then, of course, you can use the app to change without having to connect that to the device. So I think the Aluratek actually has the advantage overall because of that scheduling feature. When it comes to how each device mounts on the wall, they both of course share the exact same Spectra 6 screen. There's no difference there. Both have excellent apps, and so on. I do like the fact that Reflection Frame has a catalog of images to choose from. I really appreciate that, and there's a lot of good images there to select from as well. So that's another advantage for the Reflection Frame. So to summarize, you start by asking Wi-Fi or NFC. Does that matter? Then you ask yourself, do you want scheduled image changes or not? Or do you want a library to choose from or not? The scheduled changes without a library, that's the Aluratek. No scheduled changes, but a robust library in addition to including your own images, that is Reflection Frame. And I think those are the broad strokes of how you would decide on one versus the other. As of this video, I like them both. I'm glad that I own both. And I think, again, I remain excited for the other devices to come down the line. We're still waiting, of course, on Blooming 8 and Eink Poster to come up with their interpretations of how they implement this technology. So I'm definitely excited for those. But both Aluratek and Reflection Frame are excellent options. They're on the more less expensive than what's going to be on the market. The only ones coming out from either Eink Poster or Blooming 8 that will be cheaper are Blooming 8's much smaller screen size. So you don't have to necessarily wait to see what those other companies are coming up with. I think both of these companies provide really good products that are worth considering. Okay, that's my overall summary. I say thumbs up to the Aluratek. I'm really impressed by it. Actually, a little bit more impressed than I thought. Going in, I was thinking, well, they don't have their own library. I was kind of disappointed in that, but you can easily just find your own images and load them. And it works pretty well. So at the end of the day, the Aluratek delivered just as the reflection frame had delivered before it, just in different ways. All right, I hope that helps. Any comments or questions, please pop those into the chat. Please subscribe and like if you would. And until the next time, I will see you then.